Well, hello and good afternoon. Well, good afternoon if you're watching us live. If you're watching the replay, welcome to the Mental Health Show. I'm your host once again, David Burrows. Happy to be here for episode number 3. With the great success so far of episode 1 and 2, we've talked about several different topics. And today we're going to be offering some parenting tips, and we'll be talking about resiliency. What exactly does that mean, and why is it important? And today, joining us from Clair Child Youth Services, to start things off, Liz Page. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Good to see you.
Yes. Are you enjoying the weather?
Yes. I can't complain about the weather. It's been nice. So it's been good to get out in the sunshine and be outside and try and get the kids moving. So,
yeah, right. Well, we're going to talk about some of that in just a minute. But first, just tell everybody what your role is and what you do at Clair Child Youth Services.
So I work in the family support team, and I do some in-home family solutions. I do some clinical supports to foster care, and I do a parent group. And I'm also involved in family engagement. So I work with family members or caregivers who want to have a voice in how we shape mental health services in our community. So do a little bit of everything, but mostly support families, kids and youth and families. So.
Okay, very good. Well, then you're the expert on offering these parenting tips today, and we've got a lot to talk about. First thing that always comes to my mind as a parent myself, it does not come with a book, and there's things and so many turns that it can take. And let's talk about anxiety and fears. Go ahead.
So particularly right now with in the midst of a pandemic and with parents having their own anxieties and fears, I guess it's one of those things that it's sometimes our kids are like little weather vanes. So if we're feeling particularly anxious or nervous or hypervigilant, then oftentimes we aren't even aware that our kids are picking up on those signals and sort of transferring that anxiety to them. And so it's really important to be aware of how you're presenting and how you're feeling. And if you are anxious, and if as a parent or a caregiver you are struggling with that, it's really important to start working on ways to sort of manage that so that you're, putting your best foot forward when you're talking to your kids about how to do the same thing. And sometimes it's really cool to navigate that together and to learn tools together, like breathing, deep breathing, mindfulness strategies, using nature and the 5 senses, and all of those things to try and manage your anxiety. So it's good to role model for your kids that, you know what, even adults get anxious sometimes, and this is how I handle it, and let's try it together.
I guess, and sort of hearing between the lines in there too, is it's okay to be anxious, right? It's really just a matter of how you handle it.
Absolutely. I think every single person has some degree of anxiety about any given situation. For me, maybe speaking in public makes me anxious, but sometimes that's a good thing. It can propel you forward. You can use it as a bit of a challenge to yourself. That's good stress. The more difficult stress are maybe the things that we can't really control, like things like, there's a lot of anxiety around COVID, and what's the school year going to look like? And are we going to have a hockey season? And are we going to be able to travel ever again? And so those are some real anxieties that we're hearing from clients around kids feeling like they don't have any control over tomorrow, the next day, the next month, the next year. So anxiety is definitely one of the most common issues that we see in our line of work. But there are so many excellent tools and strategies that are helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's something, and it's something we've talked about on every episode here, is we have to learn and be willing to ask for help, right? And
absolutely.
That's harder for some of us than others, right?
And it starts with adults as role models. If we are unwilling to say, wow, I'm really not coping very well, or I need a little extra support, or I need to practice some really good self-care, if we're not willing to do those things and we're really struggling with stress, and it's like a toxic stress, it trickles over, and our kids see it, and we're teaching them by our behavior. So the most important thing we can do is show them how to manage and demonstrate it and include them, and be excellent role models.
Lead by example, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Kids do what they see us do, not what we tell them to do.
100%
Yeah.
for sure. Well,
Mhm.
and speaking of that, schedules are a big part of our daily lives. We have our routines, whether school's in, whether it's summertime activities. And I guess especially with COVID-19, it's probably harder to keep kids on. How do we keep things on track and on schedule?
It's really hard. And so acknowledging that, first of all, and just sort of giving yourself permission to have some flexibility and being able to say, you know what, we are in the middle of a pandemic. I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. If my kid's sleeping in, there's really nowhere for him or her to be. So I'm not going to, get really caught up in sort of making sure that they're doing A, B, and C. I'm going to make sure their mental health's okay. I'm going to make sure they're getting some fresh air and some exercise and eating right. And those are the major things. And so sometimes we have to let some of the little stuff go. I read a really interesting article about there's no sense of time right now for kids because they can go to bed late because they can sleep in. They don't have school. It's like an extended sort of vacation. And a lot of them, that's how they see it, and as parents, we're getting up and we're working from home, or maybe we have, obligations. And so we're stressing about them sleeping when in actuality, the article that I read said that when things start to return to normal, we can gradually start to move that line back for them and teach them, okay, so you've had a nice long, summer break, but now we need to start building in more structure and routine, which is really important because it builds that safe, secure feeling, right? The structure and routine, knowing what comes next, knowing that, things are consistent.
But there's a lot of activities that go on. Well, you mentioned school, for example, like proms and graduations were missed, and those are big, important life events. And my child's upset about that, and there's nothing I can do about it, or is there?
That's a great question. Actually, definitely we've certainly had parents seeking support around this and saying, "What do I do? I can't fix it." And it's true, you can't. And lots of times when kids are seeking our support, they're not looking for an answer. They're not looking for us to solve the problem. They're looking for us to be with them. And by that, I mean providing empathy and saying, you know what? I can understand that would be really hard. There was this time in my life when I missed and being with them and being able to understand where they're at and not saying, oh, it's only grade 8 grad, you're going to have your high school grad. And
Right.
minimizing those feelings is really not what we want to do. We want to validate and we want to provide empathy, because those two things, validation and empathy, go a really long way. If your kid feels heard and you pull them into a hug and you say, we're going to do everything we can at home to make it special. Maybe we can do a Zoom meeting with your friends and see their dresses. Maybe we can do a drive-by parade. Maybe we can get a cake. Like, trying to make it special without saying to them, you know what, sorry, that's just the way it is right now. And, you have a high school grad to look forward to. So prom,
Yeah.
I mean, those kids are not going to have a do-over, right?
Right. Well, yeah. You sort of would feel, at least I would feel brushed off. Like, well, it's no big deal, but it is to me. Even if later in life that, well, maybe it doesn't become as much of a big deal. Right now, it is important, right? Even like family vacations, I would think, are something that a lot of families plan a couple of those a year. And
Absolutely.
What do we do for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, just acknowledging that, yeah, it really is disappointing. We're disappointed too, and we're really sorry that this is happening. We wish there was something else we could do. Do you have any ideas? Do you think we could do like a beach day? And, like just coming up with some creative ideas and asking them for their input to say, what do you think would be fun? Like, do you have any ideas of things we can do? If they have a little bit of control and they have some input, they're much more likely to go along with it, rather than us building this big plan and saying, okay, so instead of prom, we're going to do A, B, and C. And they'll be like, that's lame.
Right. Yeah. Well, we as parents, we sometimes have to remember that we can learn from the youth, right? I think we're always in the we know what's best mode, and well, this is how it's going to be done, right? And just maybe open up our ears and our minds a little bit to, well, what do you guys think? That's not a hard
great point. I'll tell you, I've been learning a ton from my kids during this whole process, like I was telling you before we became live on air, is that, whole like Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams and Bluetooth headphones. My kids have been my greatest resource because quite literally my 11-year-old gets me set up sometimes and is like, press this button, Mom. And we laugh and trying to find the lighter side sometimes. And, just being able to laugh at yourself and say, this is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, this is some good parenting tips right now, but I still get frustrated. I'm a parent, regardless of my children are older. So I almost feel like if my children were younger, I don't know how well I would handle that. I'd be becoming frustrated, like we talked earlier, my own anxiety. But I got my limits too, and I need somebody else to talk to. What about other parents that are going through the same thing? Is there a way that I can reach out and connect with them?
Yes, absolutely. So there are a few opportunities in our community. I know that Lambton Mental Wellness provides some virtual support for caregivers, and Parents for Children's Mental Health has a social media group, and they're planning to do some virtual meetings. So, and I think I sent the links to you, Dave. I don't know if later on you're able to post them, but there's some really excellent links for them to be able to access in our community. Parents can also call our agency and ask for a telephone counseling or consultation, and actually just have that hour and a half to talk about, what's going on and get some support, maybe some suggestions. Oftentimes what we learn is that maybe they're burning the candle at both ends. They're trying to work from home. They're trying to make sure the kids are okay. They're worried about, maybe the future of their job. So they're really stressed and maybe not practicing those self-care strategies that are so, so important, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So if we're, running and we never stop to fuel up, things like reading a book, going for a walk, sitting down at the river, watching the water, those things just sort of take the pressure valve and release it so that you're more able to deal with the smaller stressors in the moment.
Send yourself to the corner and take a time out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do it quite often.
Yeah. Well, and the great thing about us doing this show is there are a lot of resources out there. We're sharing those today here, folks. And the services at Clair Child Youth Services are free as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. There's no cost for any of our services. And of course, we've had to move everything virtual and sort of really change on the fly. But I feel like we've done a really excellent job of making sure that if parents are calling, our intake team is able to match them with whichever service they think is most appropriate. And parents are getting a call back like right away. It's been interesting because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know if it was going to be a flood of people, but parents are managing quite well. It's interesting because I wonder if it's because there isn't the pressure of school. People are eating dinner together almost every single night. We see more and more people out walking and biking, and I don't know. I just feel like we've kind of gotten back to basics a little bit, and having those daily connections with our kids. I feel like people are managing a little bit better than they were in most cases.
Well, the world stopped, right? I've always said there's that, that thing. Yeah, I'm going to do that someday. Oh, I'm going to do that. Someday doesn't normally ever show up, but someday showed up a few months ago. And
right.
I think people are taking up some new hobbies, that's something, and learning from each other. I think we're talking to each other more. You sort of answered my question a little bit, but and I've asked this to other experts in your field as well. They weren't seeing a lot of response coming, and that made them kind of nervous. What people weren't reaching out. Has that changed? Have you seen a spike in help needs?
Certainly picked up in the last few weeks. And I do think that a lot of that comes from just the community realizing that it's available, that it's a resource, or maybe people thought, I think we're managing okay, but I really just need to check in with someone to make sure that I'm on track here. So it's been good to see that people are reaching out and connecting with us. And we returned to the offices June 22nd. We're kind of rotating staff, 1 week on and then 1 week working at home. And that has been helpful too, because even just, I think people seeing traffic in the building helps with knowing that, okay, they are there, they are available. And we really do want people to be reaching out and saying like, I need some help with this, or am I doing okay? Or who do I talk to about this?
So there's all these great resources, and they are wonderful, and it can take time to go through all, which I would encourage people to do that. But if I had to ask you, what is the one single most important thing as a parent that I can do for my children, what would that be?
Make them feel safe.
Yeah.
So, and that means that's a big thing. But it means connecting with them daily, checking in with them, saying, hey, this has been really hard. You've been kind of quiet. Like, are you having a hard time? Are you doing okay? Are you just bored? Are you sad? Asking those questions and not being too afraid to hear the answer. Asking them, say, hey, you know what? Do you want to bake some cookies? Do you want to take a walk? Do you want to walk the dog? Do you want to come with me for a car ride? Really looking for those opportunities. Want to play a board game, want to do a puzzle. And I know we don't all have the luxury of being able to do that all day long,
Right.
but finding those moments. You know what? Kids don't really want to spend all day long with us, maybe if they're really little, but they like those short, positive connections go a really long way when things are rough, because those are the sort of the building blocks of your relationship so that they'll come to you when they're struggling.
Yeah. Now, that being said, if we let our children go outside because, they can, right, with proper practices right there, and we all parent differently, and we always hear that, Tommy's mother doesn't make him do that. Now my kid comes home and says, how come you're the only one that's making us practice social distancing, and why are you being so, whatever?
Yeah.
What about I have a few ideas on what I'd say, but I don't know if it'd be the right thing on what. How do you deal with that?
Well, that's a great question, because I definitely, first of all, I've heard that from my own kids. You're the only one who's not letting me stay overnight at people's houses, and so I sometimes it's good to find the humor and say, well, I must love you more, or just kind of educating them on the reasons why, and saying, you know what, I know this, and I know you want to spend time with your friends, and I get that. And you can do all the things that are allowed now. You can ride a bike 10 feet away from your friend. You could, there's things you can do, but there's also things that we're still waiting to do, and we've got to do it. I had a manager that used to say, better to do it right than fast. And in this case, I have to say, it's super important. So if that makes me the bad guy, I'm okay with that. And that's what I would say is, I'm okay with being the bad guy because I really love you and I really want to keep you safe. And it's not just us we're keeping safe. It's the vulnerable population, your grandma, your grandpa, your great Aunt Sally. It's
Right.
not just us. It's about everybody.
And really, that whether COVID was here or not, we would hear those things like smoking, drinking, all that sort of stuff. And I'm okay with, I think when you have children, you're born the bad guy, right?
If you're never the bad guy, maybe you're not hitting all the high notes.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it, right? Is making those tough decisions. I always found anyway, it was always hard to make those hard decisions because I'm emotionally attached to my child. And sometimes we have to remove that emotion, right? Which is really hard to do, but it's just another one of those things that has to be done in proper parenting.
Well, and I often, in our parenting group, that comes up a lot. So when they're, kids and parents are clashing and really locking horns, parents, we tend to want to lecture or educate our kids in the moment when things are heated. And I always say, that's not, like, their brain is escalated and they can't hear you. They can't process what you're saying. So when your kids are heated or frustrated or angry, take a break. Do whatever makes you feel less stressed. Say to your kids, you know what, this isn't going very well. I'm going to go get a coffee. And then when I get back, we'll try again. And if, you start back down that road and it goes south again, say, you know what, we're not ready. Because if they're not calm and receptive to what we're saying, we're just wasting our time, right? So really being mindful of where we're at when we tackle those tough decisions and tough discussions is really key. Because if we are ourselves frustrated, angry, stressed, upset, it's going to go badly.
Yeah. I'm hearing, again, my kids are older, but I'm hearing other friends whose kids are younger, and they're like, oh boy, is my kid ever using this COVID-19 as a really good excuse to do whatever they want. And there's still some of those common issues that we face, but they seem to be enhanced because of COVID-19. And one of them is do your chores. I'm not getting my kids to do their chores, and I'll do that later because I don't have any, nobody's wearing a watch right now.
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? We don't want to completely absolve them of responsibility, and we don't want to say, yeah, you get just a free ride. But I think keeping in mind that we want to prioritize the relationship. So if your relationship is strained and stressed and you're fighting over whether they did the dishes, then it's time to look at how important is that right now. Maybe you want to say to them, hey, listen, I know you hate doing the dishes. I'll trade you a chore. Is there something else you would rather do? Do you want to vacuum? Like giving them some choice, or saying, you know what, because you've had a tough week, I'm going to help you do the dishes and then we're going to go for a walk. Like building in that collaborative, I'm going to help you get it done kind of thing. And again, it depends on the child's age, right? If your child's 16 and they won't lift a finger, then chances are it's not just recent. Like that's something that has evolved, right? So it's definitely, I think, important to meet them where they're at and say to them when they're in good shape, not when they're frustrated, say, you know what, I'm having a really hard time keeping up with all the chores. I feel like you're not meeting me halfway. How can we resolve this? What can we do about that? If we involve them and we talk to them, chances are they're going to be like, yeah, you're right. I haven't. I'll try harder.
Yeah. Okay, so. Mom. Yeah. Even if it arrives, as long as it gets done, right? But you point out that, we as the parent, going back to leading by an example as well, I think maybe sometimes we brush it off like, Tommy, just do what I told you. And that's all there is to it. I mean, that's how we brush it off because we're tired. We've had a long day and we don't
Goes back to self-care. Yeah.
Right. Now, speaking of bickering and nitpicking, and I remember my wife was home for the first couple of weeks in all of this, and I'm used to being here and I have a routine. I had to say, okay, wait a minute. You and I got to talk. You can't just walk in and interrupt me all the time. And we started picking at little things for a while. It's like, and that's happening with the kids. How do we deal with that?
So I think recognizing it, like you said, saying, okay, we got to draw some boundaries here. We got to sort of lay out some ground rules because this isn't going very well. Also, if you can also think to yourself, okay, they're not trying to make my life miserable. Try not to take it personally. And also, I think really important is recognize that maybe they're having a hard time not giving you a hard time. So if they're really emotional and, really irritable and, it might be more about saying to them when they're in good shape, hey, I noticed you've been really, really grumpy. I want to help you with that. Is there anything we can do? Do you need to talk to someone? Do you think you need, what do you think you need? You might be surprised. You might get answers like, I don't know. And they really might not know, but they might say, you know what? Yeah, I think I do need to talk to someone. Or I'm fine. I'm just sad that I can't go on that family vacation, or I'm sad that my prom got canceled. And then you can say, you're right. That is really sad. That's not fair. And you're right. That's a big loss.
Yeah. What about encouraging, I've said to my children, listen, I get it. If you don't want to talk to me because, I don't know, you're embarrassed or you think you're going to get in trouble or whatever that looks like. If you don't want to talk to me, that's okay. But let's find you somebody that you can talk to. And a lot of this getting them talking to is, Kids Help Phone, for example, they've gone virtual. You can text them now, right? So
you can.
Is that how we want to handle that sometimes? What's the virtual side of all of this?
So sometimes, like you say, maybe they don't want to talk to you because maybe it's about a relationship that they don't really want to share with you. Or maybe it's about something that is so personal to them they can't imagine talking to anyone face to face. So Kids Help Phone, quite some time ago, changed that you could do online chatting, you could do text, you could do anything you want. And it really opened up the floodgates for kids who might be sitting in their room afraid to pick up the phone and call someone, but would sit and chat just like online messaging. So I feel like they did a great job of really sort of removing the barriers for kids who might struggle with the idea of actually talking to someone.
Well, and that's kind of their world, right? I guess depending on the age, but they, I mean, a lot of them are born with a device in their hand now, right? And that's just what they know. And is that 24 hours something that they can do?
Yeah, 24/7, 365 days a year. And one of the things we've noticed from doing the telephone consultations through virtual platform is that most younger clients quite like it. Like you say, that's their world. That's what they're used to.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What if I want to get involved, if as a parent, or I want to have more of a voice about mental health or any of the, and I say mental health. There's all those subcategories that go along with mental health.
Sure.
In particular that I've experienced. Can I help with this?
Yeah. So we have at St. Clair Child Youth, we have a family engagement strategy, and we have a family advisory committee. And we would love to build capacity and have new members join us. So if anybody is interested in sort of having a voice about how mental health services are shaped, or has questions, or just wants to understand the landscape in our community, it would be a great place to start. On our website, there's a family engagement tab, and you can check that out. And there's an email for our coordinator, Jen, who's amazing. So there's definitely opportunities to that end. And also with the Access Open Minds coming, there's so many opportunities coming down the pike. And also, again, the PCMH, the Parents for Children's Mental Health, a lot of the parents who are involved in that group tell me that what they love about that group is that there's other parents having the same struggles, and that they hear each other, and maybe there's not a solve, but they feel supported and connected.
We often feel alone, but it's really surprising how many others, like, there's common denominators going on out there. So I guess it's nice to be able to just go, oh, okay, so it's not just me.
Yeah. Our parent group, for instance, is a 6-week group. And at the end of the 6 weeks, we do a feedback survey. And every time they tell us, well, the curriculum and the information was really good, but what I loved the most was the connection around the room and feeling like I'm not alone. It's not just me. I'm not a horrible parent. It's a real sense of partnership and, collaboration and community in that room. And so it's very valuable for those people who are really in the trenches and feeling like nobody understands, nobody could possibly know how hard this is. So
I would think being not judged would go along with that as well, because you and I both know, we've talked about it before, about that stigma. We want to stop the stigma. I've quoted you as saying it's not 1 in 5, it's 5 in 5, because we're all affected somehow by mental health, including us. So yes. Not being judged is important too.
It is 100% key. If somebody feels judged, they're not going to seek help. They're not going to reach out. They're not going to share their worries or concerns. They're going to be on the defensive, and they're going to be keeping it all in, because it's a sense of shame, and shame is such a conversation killer, right? It's people retreat when they feel shame.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I thank you very much. I know you're on vacation, so I appreciate you taking today here. Before I let you go, Liz, is there anything else you want to add for all the viewers?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I think that I'm a parent, and I know that when it was early days and trying to balance the online learning and the working from home, and there were times where I thought, like, I could probably write a book about this, but I'm struggling. So I just want every parent to know that you are not alone, and that you don't have to be rocking it 100% of the time. We're not looking for perfect parents. We're looking for parents who are connected and interested and engaging with their kids. And that's all. We're just doing the best we can.
And you're doing a great job down there. Thanks so much again, Liz. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. I'm sure we'll be talking.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
Liz Page from St. Clair Child Youth Services. Some great conversation on parenting tips. Now, we're going to continue the conversation more now. Resiliency. You ever heard that word? You might have a thought on what that is. And why is it important? And we've got some more of our experts joining us here today. Emily Powell and Scott Rogers. Thank you both for being here today.
Hi, David. Thanks for having us.
Hi, David. Thanks for having us.
Yes. Well, welcome. I'm really curious about this one, because I've probably even used this word with my children, and I hope I was right in how I explained it to them. We're going to find out today. Let's start with it. What is resiliency?
Yeah, if you're a parent and you go online, you'll see lots of different definitions, depending on what website you're looking at. But really what it boils down to is we want to teach our children and our youth to effectively cope and adapt well to adverse events in our life, tragedies, threats, losses, and stressful situations such as COVID. So a really basic way to understand it is just that ability to bounce back after life gives us challenges. And inevitably, when I'm working with my clients, it's not when there's going to be or if there's going to be a problem. It's going to be when there's an issue or when there's a challenge. And so a really key part to resiliency is, it doesn't mean that you're not going to experience difficulty or just distress. And as humans, we're all born with the capacity to be resilient. And you can start learning right as infants, as if parents are responding them, they'll learn to soothe themselves in the crib, all the way up to, teenagers planning their next steps for college or university. At every age and stage, there's lots of opportunities for us to teach and for kids to learn. And the other point, kind of building on what Liz was talking about, is it's important for parents to know that, in order to help build resiliency, all caring adults can play a role in their children's lives. Like my boys are older, and we were a big sports family. Like, we relied on coaches and teachers and youth group leaders, those kinds of things, in addition to parents, to help teach the importance of building resiliency. So it's essentially that ability and skill. And if they lack some of the internal skills to be resilient, who can they go to access resources to teach them resiliency? It's that bouncing back idea, Dave.
Right. Okay. Well, so far it was what I kind of thought it was, but I learned a few new things in there. But there's probably some it would seem obvious answers to this next question. But what's the underlying side to why is it important to develop this resiliency?
I think what better time to talk about why resiliency is important than a global pandemic that none of us saw coming, David. But there's so many reasons why resiliency is important. I think how children become, or their resiliency in childhood kind of shapes how they adapt and to adversity and change later in life. And as we know, children and youth go through so much, particularly these days, emotionally, socially, but also there's so many developmental milestones they hit too. That is a lot of change for them and a lot of difficulties for them, making resiliency extra important, so that those changes don't become increasingly important, particularly before they hit that adolescence period, right? Where, as we all know, Scott, I know you have teenagers at home, you can attest to this. It's a whole different ball game when they hit that developmental stage, right? In terms of mood changes, socially, they add in relationships. So teaching those skills at a young age to prepare them for those things is so important. I think also there's so much research to show that it can even impact our physical health. Those who respond to adversity and change with resilience are healthier, they live longer, they have more positive relationships, and most importantly, they're less likely to feel depressed. So we know it's a major protective factor for mental health. I'm sure you've heard the 1 in 5 children and youth struggle with mental health. I feel like you can't have St. Clair Child and Youth on your show here, David, if you don't hear that 1 in 5 stat.
Well, and I said to Liz, I've often quoted her as saying it's really more like 5 in 5.
Literally.
Because we're all affected directly or indirectly. And really that 1 in 5, that's only the ones that actually filled out the survey and admitted to it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So there's going on there.
We
now,
mental health.
That's right. Now, resiliency, as important as it is, it's also a very sensitive word, right? Because we can, as parents, maybe even without knowing sometimes, have a negative impact on how our children are resilient, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you mentioned it's kind of a controversial subject, because I think people hear resiliency and they think like, oh, is that avoiding being sad? But it's very different from that. Liz talked about some really, really great parenting strategies. I love watching Liz talk about parenting. So she touched on this a little bit, and we often run this resiliency workshop out in the community, her and I, and we love talking about sort of how parenting style can actually impact resiliency. I'm sure, David, have you heard of the helicopter parent?
Oh, I just the other day, actually, my wife brought it up.
Yeah. So that's the type of parent that kind of oversees everything. But my new favorite one is the snowplow parent. Have you heard of that one?
That one, no.
No. So that's the parenting style, and I think every parent listening today probably can relate to this and are probably like, I'm guilty. It's the type of parenting where we try and kind of get rid of any obstacle out of the way that would get in the way of our child's success. And in our modern world, I think we're all just so competitive and so driven to, yeah, exactly. I'm not a parent yet, but I 100% will be a snowplow parent at some point in my life. But the issue is, David, I think when we allow our kids to kind of plow their own snow sometimes, that's when they really learn a lot of great problem solving skills, a lot of independence. They build confidence, all leading to more resilience, right? And those kind of, I'm going to use air quotes, smaller, because they feel big to our kids, but those smaller adversities are what prepare them for those later, bigger, often bigger challenges around loss and going to school and such.
Yeah, great explanation. The snowplow parent, boy, I'm going to have to go back and reevaluate myself now.
Everyone's been there, David. It's okay.
Yeah. How has COVID impacted children's resilience, though? Like, this is like, we've never seen this. We might have thought, oh yeah, that could happen someday, just not in my lifetime, and then boom, it showed up.
Yeah, we've put a lot of thought into that the last few months, and there's been a lot written about it. And I think a key point is that it's likely impacted everyone's mental health. If we think of mental health on a continuum, it's impacted adults and kids. One of the lots of the worries right now are some of the kids, like kids not being in school, like they've had a loss of those caring adults, those teachers, those coaches, EAs, principals. A lot of the people that they interact with at school, each one of them has a part in helping build their character and keeping them safe. I saw a commercial on TV today about school breakfast programs, so they're, child protection authorities are concerned that perhaps some of the calls were down early on in the pandemic, or maybe still are, I'm not sure. So, our kids at home in unsafe situations, the loss of extracurriculars. Some kids may struggle in school, but one of the local pediatricians calls it, find what your kid is a rock star at. So, they may struggle at school, but they're great at dance, or they're great at baseball. And so not just sports, but all kinds of extracurriculars, with those being taken away, I think there's an impact on their self-esteem. And Liz touched on this, the loss of structure and routine and predictability. Those are really important things for kids to feel safe with. Increased health anxiety, we're seeing that right now, David, with the pro sports wanting to come back, and a lot of the athletes are concerned about the impact. So I think there's lots of levels of increased health anxiety, and there's a couple other things that I think I worry about too, is with even though we're less isolated now, in the early days of this, caregivers didn't have as many opportunities to be supported with their friends and family, so that they could support kids. So, everybody's stress level was high, and you said at the beginning, there's no books written about this, and in this situation, it's quite literally, how could anybody have anticipated this? So I to really kind of summarize the answer, I think it's impacted on all kinds of levels. And there's there's some strengths that we can touch on before we're done today, or some opportunities, I think is probably a better way to say it. But what you asked is a big concern. There's, safety and isolation and loss of connection. Like there's lots of things for parents to think about.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of segues into my next question here. Okay, so I'm a parent. I'm not a counselor. How do I promote this and teach this to my children? Because they don't always want to, I don't want to, like the sex talk, for example. They don't want to hear that, right? So how do we approach this resilience and teach it to our children?
Like I think Liz touched on a few things. Once you've established some of the basics, like, structured kind of as much of a routine as you can get. And she really talked about the opportunity for relationships. And you know, at St. Clair, we've moved away from sort of that behavior modification type of approach. And not that children shouldn't experience consequences, but we're really looking at what Liz says, that relationship and validation. There's lots of other things, but right now I think it's really important that parents can role model that positivity, right? So, keeping things in perspective, parents maintaining a positive outlook. I think, you asked about anxiety early on in this session, and I think a lot of children and teens are afraid of anxiety. And Emily talked about snowplow. Really, there's opportunities. Like, parents need to be able to understand that children need to have some manageable stress in their life, so their brain grows, the connections in their brains increase. Tolerable stress is one way of putting it, or manageable stress. So not too much, things like going to a birthday party, or the first day of school, or for teenagers, their job interview, or, there can be opportunities all at every age and stage for those opportunities, and parents can role model that. One of the really cool things that I found for resiliency that I thought was incredible was the food drives that Chatham Kent and Sarnia Lambton had, the Miracle Days, right? So parents can teach resiliency by, sharing these news stories, like when you saw the waving to healthcare workers, and and buying them pizzas and things, or the Miracle Days. Some communities have set records for the amount of food that they gather.
Yeah.
That really gives kids a sense of purpose. It teaches them how to help others. It can build their confidence and their self-esteem. I saw a picture or a story recently. It was just a simple lemonade popsicle stand, and the kids were, that's as old as decades. You've seen those kinds of stands, but the children were going to donate the money. So when parents teach, like, character building, being respectful and kind, and having pride is really important. And I think there's lots of neat stories of new challenges. Like Liz touched on her kids helping her with technology. So even though they're not in school, there's opportunities to grow and learn, because we're being tested in new ways. And I think kids need to learn how to be self-sufficient in a lot of ways. And Liz had touched on problem solving. So instead of snow plowing and solving it for them, teach them the steps in problem solving, right?
Yeah.
Validating. I know that's you got a C+ on your last test, and you want better grades. What are some ways that you can address that? So instead of calling the school and fixing it for them, you teach them ways to solve that. So
is that sort of part of building the resilience, how they, our children or youth, can build the resilience in themselves? Because we're not always around. Sometimes those things are going to come up, and they need to know how to build that resilience.
Yeah, I can answer that one, David. I do want to take a step back to something that you said earlier around how resiliency can be a controversial topic. And I think as I'm listening to Scott talk, as I was listening to Liz talk, I think that a really important takeaway before I move on to the youth piece is it's not about, hey, Jimmy, go do it all on your own, right? It's very much, it's very much like when you feel that need as a parent to jump in and kind of plow that snow for them, stop and think, okay, how can I, and Liz did a really great job of touching on this, and Scott did as well, of how can I be validating and how can I show empathy and how can I be with my child as they experience this adversity, but also allow them to navigate that themselves.
Yeah.
For example, like
that word experience, let them
Mhm.
have the experience. My son, for the first time, is dealing with an insurance company. That's a
Mhm.
life experience, right? You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
eventually we were able to step in and help, but we had to, is that sort of the same thing what you're talking about? Let him do that?
Yeah, exactly. When you feel that urge to kind of jump in and make those decisions for him, um, even if it's something as small as like your child feels overwhelmed and they don't have time to finish their homework, rather
Mhm.
than do the homework for them or call the teacher for them, sit down with them and be like, I see that you're really overwhelmed right now. Like, how can we kind of lay this out so it feels a little bit less overwhelming for you? How can we lay it out as like baby steps, one step at a time sort of thing?
Yeah.
Weigh
Okay.
the pros and the cons.
Right. So now then back to building the resilience in themselves. That's
Mhm.
not, you know, that's a skill to be learned, I guess. But that's probably hard on the parent too, or can be, to let go. I guess we have to let go to do that.
Mm-hmm. Especially when they get to those teenager years where um, they're at that stage where they need to learn that independence and learn those skills even more right before they go off to university and early adulthood. Um, I do think Scott touched on a lot of really great points. I think I heard you mention sort of more from like an internal within perspective. I think there's a lot youth can do for themselves to build resilience. And a lot of it's like right here, right? Of just like changing our mindset. Um, when we're youth and something happens, it feels really, really big, particularly with relationships and friendships, because those are our priorities at that age. I think just kind of shifting our perception of those situations and thinking about it a little bit differently. Again, I'm not saying don't be sad about it. Say a breakup happens. Allow yourself that space to feel sad, but then ask yourself the really, really important questions that are going to help you learn and grow from those really hard situations. Like, okay, what did I learn from this relationship that I maybe want to do differently in my next relationship? Or what qualities do I want to find in my next partner, rather than kind of sitting with that sadness?
Right.
Um,
Kind of like taking a personal inventory, right? I guess, or a reflection of the
exactly.
choices that were made in that situation. And I mean, if we make the same bad choices we did before, nothing's going to be different, right?
Exactly. It helps put it into perspective for us, right? When we're sitting with that sadness, it feels very permanent. But when we ask ourselves, like, okay, in 2 weeks, is this going to matter? Am I still going to feel sad? In 6 months, what's this going to look like? In 1 year, what's this going to look like? Right. And I think parents play a really, really important role in coaching their kids through that, not doing that for them. Right. Again, coming back to that, validating how they're feeling, but also asking those reflection questions like, okay, you failed that test and I see you're really overwhelmed and you're really worried about that impacting your final grade. How do you think we could study differently next time? Right.
Yeah. Very good.
Encourages learning and growth.
Yes. Right. Right. Well, and feeling a part of, I made that decision myself. That's the growth you talk about up here, right? You know, I think that's the important part of what you said there. What do you think is the most important takeaway for parents listening in on resilience right now from this discussion? Is there one particular point that's most important?
Yeah, it's hard to narrow down for sure, but I think for me, the most important takeaway, and Liz again touched on this as well, is our kids are watching, right?
Mm.
And I don't mean that in an intimidating way, and I don't mean that in a like, hey, let's hide our emotions. I actually mean quite opposite. I think parents these days feel this really heavy pressure to protect their kids from their feelings, to protect their kids from adversities. But really where the real learning happens for kids around resiliency is watching our parents experience that as well, and watching our parents adapt and find ways to manage. And I think that can be like as simple as a parent comes home from a bad day at work and says, hey, Jimmy, I had a really hard day today. I think I need a little bit of space right now. I'm just going to go for a walk around the block. It just normalizes it for our kids. And I think for me, that's the biggest takeaway is let's normalize that it's okay to not be okay. And let's encourage our kids to adapt and be flexible and find ways to problem solve.
Very good. Scott, I'll ask you the same question. Do you have another answer for that?
Yeah, I would just build on that. I think that the messaging should be, this is whatever it is, COVID, loss of a grandparent, whatever the situation is, let's deal with this head on. Let's face it head on. And, I really think we've talked about lots of concrete strategies, but one of the most important things that parents can do is teach the children and their youth that they need to have the belief in their own abilities, their abilities succeed when challenged. Like, it's a very critical factor. So Emily talked a bit about that. Like, there are so many external factors beyond our control, but there's lots of internal factors. Life does happen to us sometimes, but kids and teens need to understand that they have an ability, that internal focus of control that they can manage and face and succeed in these situations. And so there are times in life where we just learn to live with things, or we just try and get through. But, if parents can instill that sense that they're competent and they have abilities and that they can succeed when challenged, I think that'll go a long way toward kids taking the reins and being proactive. Try not to be passive recipients of change, because change is going to happen no matter what. And I remember speaking to a doctor, and she said on occasion there's some value in that idea of the stiff upper lip, and this is what's going on, and we just have to face it. And if kids believe that they can face it and succeed, then that'll go a long way toward being resilient.
Very good. Well, it's been a great discussion and a real eye-opener to what resilience really is and why it's so important, how we handle it in ourselves and how we teach it. Thank you both very much. Before I wrap things up, is there any final points, Emily or Scott, that you want to put in before I let you go?
I don't think it would be a podcast from St. Clair Child Youth if we didn't do a little bit of a plug here, David. And we are open for services, and our agency is so focused on building resilience in children, youth, and families. So I think it's important when I talk about normalizing it's okay to ask for help, having conversation with our kids and our families, like, hey, if you're struggling right now, there's this place available that would love to chat with you. I think there's so much stigma around mental health today, and I would love to see families open that conversation up a little bit more.
I can reaffirm, if you will, what you said. I've said it before, and I'm proud to say it again. St. Clair Child and Youth Services was in my life a long time ago when I was a teenager, and to this day, I'm still very grateful for the support that I have. And the services were very minimal back there on Ontario Street back in the day. So I think it's fantastic that St. Clair Child and Youth still exists, and I would encourage anybody who's watching to spread the website around and just go visit and find out what's all available there. Scott, what about you? Anything else?
I just like to end with a quote that I read on the internet, and it was from an expert in resilience. And they said, quote, "Let's help our children face this crisis head on, so the positive skills they learn from this experience become their lasting legacy of this pandemic."
Fantastic. Great way to end the podcast. Thank you both very much for joining today. And by the way, thank you for the work that you do in our community at St. Clair Child and Youth Services. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe in this pandemic.
Thanks for having us, David.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And we thank you for your words of St. Clair on behalf of all of our coworkers.
Yes, we appreciate you opening up the conversation around mental health for sure.
All right, Emily Powell and Scott Rogers joining us from St. Clair Child and Youth Services. Well, we talked about parenting tips. Thank you, Liz Page, for coming in and some great information there. And again, resiliency. Maybe you got a little bit more of an eye-opener on what that is, why it's important. Please take the time to click the share button wherever you're watching this, whether it's on YouTube or wherever on Facebook. Share this around. We're doing this mental health show for a reason. We want people to understand and have access to all this information that is available to you for free. We'll be doing another episode coming up very soon next week, so we hope you'll come back and join us once again for that. I'm your host, David Burrows, for the Mental Health Show. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Bye for now.